Because we are live. Yes, we are live, folks. It's a Thursday roundtable. So glad you're able to join us today. If you're just now piping in, we're talking about creativity in healthcare recruitment. If there's any time we need creativity, it's right now more than ever. So I've got a great panel with me today. It's going to be myself, and also it's Dr. Caroline Brookfield, she is a creativity speaker as well as veterinarian. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Rollis.
Glad to have you. And then we have a familiar face, one that I'm definitely she's been on many of my shows, and I always enjoy having her on, Miss Teresa Mazzaro. She's a healthcare recruitment expert, in my opinion. She's the president of the National Association of Healthcare Recruiters and is a recruiter as well as a nurse by trade, but as a recruiter at Johns Hopkins Medicine at Suburban Hospital located in Maryland. Welcome to the show, Teresa.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Well, glad to have you both. And we want to kind of dive into this subject about creativity, because this is a time period that we're in today that we definitely need more creativity in the marketplace. And so what's your take on this? What are you seeing right now as far as a need for creativity first? What have you been noticing on your end, Dr. Brookfield?
Well, what I've been noticing, first of all, is people talk a lot about innovation, but they often will resist this idea of creativity because they have this idea of some hippie with macrame and coming in and slapping paint around the corporate boardroom. But in fact, you can't have innovation without individual creativity. And I think what's missing is this connection between the results that companies want and the engagement of the individual everyday creativity at the individual employee level.
Makes sense. And then from your end, what have you been seeing from your end? Is there a big need for creativity these days, in your opinion, Teresa?
Well, creativity, I think, is something that helps you stand out from the competition. So when people have a choice, and in the world of nurse recruitment or respiratory therapy recruitment or any kind of healthcare recruitment, they have so many options. I even think about some of our entry-level positions where we might want them to work in food services, or we might want them to work in housekeeping, and they can go work at an Amazon warehouse and get sign-on bonuses and more money per hour. So why would they come work around, where patients might be sick in a hospital setting? So I think anything that we can do to draw their attention to what we have to offer. I just read a great article about having managers do videos to preview jobs that are in, and have that video embedded in the job posting, which is something that I work with Rollis, you and your team of HR Maximizer on, where you guys help me create videos like a video job profile, right? So now it's about taking it a step further and having the right audience look at that, be able to look at it from their mobile phone is so important. So it's like not only having the authenticity, the creativity, but the ability to see it quickly from wherever it is that they're looking for that job. Or not looking, and they're just a passive candidate.
Exactly. Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense. And that's one of the things I've been noticing too as we look at the landscape is people are looking for more new things too, right? They get really bored extremely quickly with the same old thing. And we've been there's ways we've been communicating our jobs very similarly for the past, 30 years, 40 years. And if you think about since the internet's been around, those job postings, a lot of them look like they always did, but there's some innovators out there like a Teresa and others who have said, you know what, let's do something a little bit different, which I appreciate. That's why I really appreciate working with Teresa, because she's so creative. She's always coming up with other new ideas. Let's do this. Let's implement that, So from your end, Caroline, what do you think is the thing that holds people back from tapping into that part of themselves? Because I don't see a lot of it out there.
Yeah, I think, Rollis, you hit the nail on the head when you said you've been doing it the same way for 30 or 40 years. So we have developed this need and this instinct to fit in because thousands of years ago, if we were excluded from our tribe, we would die. We'd die of starvation or predation. And so when we see people doing things a certain way, we tend to do this more of that. And in fact, over the last few years, with all of the, I hate to use the word uncertainty, when we feel uncertain, it actually amplifies that response. It actually amplifies our drive to do what's familiar and do what seems like the right way to do it. So that is one barrier, a very unconscious barrier to doing something new, is that we think that we'll be rejected. Rejection feels like physical pain. So nobody likes feeling rejected. So doing things the same way sometimes, I think, is about your peers seeing you as credible and competent. The second part of that is fear of judgment, or fear of your inner critic, of thinking, well, nobody else has done this, so maybe this is a bad idea. And what are people going to think of me? And what if it fails? What if nobody applies for my job if I do a unique video? And we all know logically that's not true, but getting past those key unconscious reactions to those situations can be a real challenge, in my opinion.
That makes sense. Now, in the recruitment space, I know you're a great person to talk to about this. What have you seen? Do you see that there's a holding back to kind of go with the status quo for the most part, or do you see there's an embracing of innovation and creativity when you look at the recruitment space, Teresa?
Oh my goodness. I think we as healthcare recruiters as a whole, and I can say this on behalf of my association and where I work, that we are typically behind. We're behind. Healthcare recruiters are behind. What's funny is I work for this most amazing organization, and we're innovative, and we do all of these great things when it comes to medicine and discovery and research. But yet there are very old-fashioned sort of oh, this video right now, this doesn't look professional. What's behind you? It's not in a professional setting, and it's not representing the brand standards, if you will. So there's that fear that you're going to, I guess, betray the brand or not represent it well, even though everything I've seen in literature talks about the authentic, video, or the authentic communication is the best communication. And the other thing I think is interesting is some of my best resources for learning are coming from people that are like sourcers, that are coming from the SourceCon environment, or from people that are in tech recruitment, because they have to be on the cutting edge of everything. And I think in healthcare recruitment, we strive for, I feel like we're getting better at trying to be the latest and greatest. But I remember going to an organization and they were so excited because they were going to get a QR code on a sheet of paper that somebody could, take a picture of, or download an app at the time, because smartphones didn't have the ability to go right to the link. And I joked around. I was like, we were using QR codes at my old hospital for 5 years ago. What are you talking about? But it was just in their mind, it was so fresh and new. And it was like, yeah, that's so old. But there are still organizations that probably aren't even there yet.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, Caroline just had me thinking of something. I wish I could do a VR, a virtual reality of one of our new hybrid OR cath lab rooms. What would that look like? Put your VR glasses on and check out this,
Exactly. And Caroline, you're so nice. You didn't even correct me on how I had veterinarian misspelled. I was so quickly,
Okay.
I was just kind of quickly getting it up because I had deleted it and then brought it back. So anyway, no, those are great
Embrace
points.
the failure. Embrace the failure, Rollis.
So anyone who comes on live will not even know it even happened, right? They're just going to come on and see it. Is it spelled correctly now? Do I have it right now?
Yes. I'm I don't have my reading glasses on, but I believe it is. That's why I don't even notice. That's why, 'cause I can't read that.
Yeah. In fact, myself and Caroline, we were joking about the skit I had seen where this interviewer is he likes to play jokes on people. As Ali G was the clip, and he's interviewing a veteran who's also a veterinarian, and so he kept purposely getting them confused. And the interviewee, the one he's interviewing, is just getting so frustrated that he's just not getting the point. Anyway, there was a funny story that Caroline was going to tell me, and I said, you know what? Do not tell me that story now. I want you to say it during the live, and then let's kind of break that apart and talk about that. Go ahead,
Okay.
Caroline.
Well, the funny thing is, I do stand-up comedy as well, as you know, Rollis, and I do have a joke about being a vet and a veteran, and being confused about the terms. It's a funny confusion, but do you want me to tell a story about the confusion over the people I met in Florida? Is that the one?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was telling Rollis how, being from Canada, I graduated from vet school. I went to work in Florida. Didn't know much about the military, and obviously knew nothing really about the U.S. other than what I learned in school, kind of thing. But I went down there and had connected with the friends. Long story, but they were having kind of a party, and I was meeting a bunch of their friends. And typically, like, what do you do for a living? And they said, "Oh, we're Navy pilots." And I said, "Oh, I thought Navy was just boats. Like, what is planes?" And they're like, "Oh no, like we fly jets." And I said, "What, like a jumbo jet?" I'm totally clueless. And they by then they were getting a little concerned, like, what's with this girl? Because usually if you're in Florida and someone says they're a Navy jet pilot, like, it's a totally different reaction. And they said, "No, we don't fly, or no, we fly faster than a jumbo jet." And so I'm like, "Is it like the Concorde?" Like, I can't even, I mean, this can tie to recruitment, like knowing like having a common language, right?
Right.
So, and then I was like, they said, "We don't fly passengers." And I said, "Well, why would you need to get something somewhere so fast? What's the point?" And so finally they had to say, "Have you ever seen the movie Top Gun?"
Oh my God.
And I said, "Oh, that's really cool." And they were just like looking at each other like, "Who is this girl?"
You must have been in the Pensacola area.
Yeah, I was in Jacksonville, but yeah.
Jacksonville, yeah. NAS, absolutely. Yeah, I know it.
So Teresa has a connection with that. So I want to Teresa, tell us about your connection with that branch of the military.
The Navy, actually, it's kind of funny that I'm like at my mom's apartment right now, and there's my dad's Navy stuff. My father, you'll appreciate, Caroline, 20 years in the Navy, and he was never on a sub, and he was never on a ship. He flew on the back of a P-3, which is an anti-sub aircraft, and he dropped sonar buoys in the water, pinging for subs, mostly like I think Aleutians and Alaska, and back in the day, either Vietnam or Cold War type activities, sometimes off the coast of, the Philippines, sometimes off the coast of Portugal. So, and then he was the one who said, "Well, you should go in the Air Force." So I went in the Air Force. So,
so she's part of the Air Force.
A much longer story behind that.
I'm retired Air Force. I flew on the back of C-130s, which is, as people would say, it's a P-3 with inverted engines. So, and you know what's interesting is, as we're sitting here talking about this, that's something about recruiting that is an art form, I think, is the ability to connect with your candidates. And I feel like I've been set up for such great success because, especially where I live now and recruit now, there's a lot of people that are either in the military, in the Guard and Reserves, or they're former military, just because we have a lot of military bases in the DC area. And when you can have, and I know, there's the HR concept of like, you're not supposed to ask personal questions, or you're not supposed to talk about all these things. And I'm not advocating that you do for anybody who's watching, but I'm saying is that when you can make a connection, like, oh, like I can look at a resume and I know that this is a military spouse because they've been to San Diego, they've been to Newport News. I can tell exactly what branch of the service that person is in. And, I just know. But it's like, it's nice to just, especially if somebody is a veteran, thank them for their service. And I know we're talking about creativity in healthcare recruitment. Sometimes that creativity is getting beyond you as a recruiter, getting beyond your own list of questions, right? So the people that are the ones asking these questions, because I have to qualify you as a candidate, are the same people that have the 27 bullet points on their job posting that you lose me on the third bullet point because who cares, right? Like, just ask me if I have the experience, or show me a pie graph of what you're looking for, or better yet, a video. I want it quick and easy. But Like, I don't say, do you currently have your ACLS? If you're an ICU nurse, I'm going to make an assumption here. And, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have your ACLS. But I'm not going to ask that list of questions. It's more about connecting with you.
Yeah.
And when I hire people, very rarely nowadays, it feels like hiring, especially critical care nurses, they can go any place else, and we don't necessarily pay the most money. We have great benefits, but we don't necessarily have the highest base pay. We have other benefits that are great. But when they accept the job, it's because of the warm, welcoming feeling that they got first from me, and then from my leadership team and the people that they interview with. And that to me it shouldn't be listed in creativity and healthcare recruitment, but my gosh, people, if you're a recruiter out there and you're not forming a connection with these folks, and you know what, even if they're not going to get the job, you've still made a connection. They could be a silver medalist for you in the future. So yeah,
absolutely. This is how I feel about that. Those are great points, because one of the things too that with Teresa, and I've done it with others, but she does it the best, is as I say, okay, for instance, when we talk about Air Force or we talk about military, I can ask her, what are some similarities that you can see from that over to recruitment? And then she'll just talk for a few minutes about it, and then I can capture that on video. Sometimes creativity can just be tapping into your own experiences and then showing how it relates to whatever you're talking about. And that's what sticks with people more so than just, like you said, going through a list of questions. It's hard to create that connection that way, which is why I like to do the show the way I do. I like to just have like an open conversation like this versus me having like a list of like 12 questions that I ask each of you. To me, it's just a much more boring show. So I like to keep it light.
I'd love to comment on what Teresa was saying there too, because it's so instrumental to creativity. When you talk about engaging with a candidate, it sounds like you're using your curiosity, which is one of the habits of creativity. So ironically, like you're saying, even if the candidate is not a fit for the job that you have, by engaging your curiosity, asking questions and trying to connect with them on a different level, it adds ingredients to your universe brain so that when you're trying to come up with new idea or insight, I imagine like a rocket ship that like runs through your brain and it goes to all these different experiences that you're not even consciously doing. And the more experiences and connections that you can make between things, the more likely you'll have an insight or a massive aha, which might be months after your interview with this candidate. But by exploring those open areas and making that rapport, you are actually helping your own creativity, even if that candidate doesn't get hired, right? So I love that comment about being curious. It's fundamental to creativity.
So I love that. I want to ask one of my fun questions, but then what I want you to keep in the back of your mind, though, Caroline, is what about those people? I hear this all the time. I'm not creative. I'm not a creative person. So how would you tap into that creativity? So I'm gonna let that marinate with you, but I want to ask a fun question. And so since Teresa's been on the show many times, she knows the drill. I'm gonna ask her first, and then you're gonna pipe in with your answer. Okay. So would you rather cut your fingernails? Oh, no, I'm not going to do that one. Okay. Would you rather have a nosy neighbor or a noisy neighbor? Which one would you rather, Teresa?
Absolutely. I'd rather have a nosy neighbor.
Okay. Why is that?
Nosy. Because I could be a voyeur. No, I'm just kidding. If what I meant by saying that was, if they want to watch me, because I live in a condo in kind of one of those garden basement condos. So the windows are, and if we have the windows halfway open. And when people walk by, I'm always curious, like, what does that look like? So I've looked into my own condo and I'm like, oh, you see me cooking, drinking wine and entertaining guests. And if you want to be nosy, and hey, if you want to knock on my door and come on in, why not?
So you just got that welcoming personality. That's awesome. Okay, so Caroline, what would
well, they've got to bring wine to the door, though.
You got to bring wine.
Caveat on
okay,
that.
What kind of wine, though? What kind of wine? This is very important.
You know what? I just heard a great podcast on these Vino Nobles, which is a wine that is from Montepulciano, not to be confused with the Montepulciano d'Abruzzo grape, which comes from d'Abruzzo, which is not the same as a Vino Nobile grape, which is from Montepulciano. So that's my new red Italian wine that I'm drinking right now.
Awesome.
Too much?
No, this is
I was
this
like
is great.
red or white. That's kind of my, or the pink stuff.
No, this is great. Okay, so what about you, Caroline? Which one would you pick of the two?
Absolutely, the nosy neighbor.
Okay, why is that?
Well, I mean, sometimes a nosy neighbor can be good if there's something going on in your house and it shows that they're concerned. But I cannot stand noise. I have ADHD. And even if like a neighbor down the street is listening, I'll be like, that sound of that bass is driving me crazy. My husband's like, I can't even hear it. So I particularly have an aversion to noise. And it doesn't bother me if people want to get up into my business.
Okay, all right. I actually agree with both of you because I thought about the whole nosy neighbor helping me out, like when I'm out of town, if something strange is going on at my house, they can look out for me. So yeah, I'm actually with you guys on that. So we are.
What's the show, Mrs. Kravitz? Oh my God, Leave It to Beaver. I don't know. Old show, dating myself. Like Mrs. Kravitz, I think, was like the nosy neighbor.
I think of Mrs. Roper in Three's Company. I remember that show when I was growing up, and she was like, I think she was kind of nosy, wasn't she?
Okay, so we know I'm older than you. Keep going.
Well, you're not that much older than me. We're probably not that far apart. Okay, so Caroline, what are the 3 steps? And Teresa, I want you to tap into, because you've been tapping into the creative part of your brain quite a bit. I don't know for how long, but at least as long as I've met you. So Caroline, what would you suggest as being those things that if I say I'm not creative or I'm not a creative person, how can you help me to tap into my creativity?
Yeah, well, the easy answer to that is that you're wrong because everybody is creative. The challenge just becomes the definition, right? So people think I'm not creative because I can't paint, but that same person built some incredible pivot table to make their work more efficient, which is creative. So it's a biological fact that we're creative, just like we breathe. So in the same way that you can learn techniques to breathe better during anxiety or stress, you can learn techniques to be more open to your own creativity. So I'm writing a book, which hopefully that's very creative. It hopefully will be released in December. And I talk about the 5 easy habits you can do in a few minutes a day. It's not some formula or some like 12-step process. It's just these little habits to build into your day. And it spells the word dance. The first one being a daydream. So, I mean, Rollis, how many people do you know that put their phones down and just stare out the window for a few minutes a day?
That's a tough one. I don't see people putting their phones down very much. They just keep it in their hands the whole time.
Right. Yeah, and to engage that default mode network, which is what I was talking about earlier with the universe of all the different experiences, to be able to tap into that network, which is where we create our insights, we need to have that space and time without filled with tasks. So daydream is the first one. You can do it in 30 seconds, a couple of times a day. It doesn't take long, but daydreaming about something fantastical or something meaningful is what helps build creativity. So if you were just ruminating over that email your manager sent, or if you're just daydreaming about what you're going to make for dinner, those aren't as productive as daydreams that involve something fantastical, like living in an alternate universe, or something that's very meaningful to you. So
can I ask, I know you probably like trying to, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So working in a hospital setting and being in the hospital every day, sometimes for me, it's helpful to walk downstairs by our entrance. Rollis, you know where that north building entrance is. That's where all the patients' family members come through, and sometimes patients come through. And I like to go downstairs, and I might have my phone with me, but I literally don't use my phone. I just sit and I watch because it helps remind me of why I'm there. Mm-hmm. Is that the same thing, or should I be just dreaming about like going to Mars or something?
No, I mean, I think that's a perfect example because you're sitting there and you're thinking about something that's very, very meaningful to you, which is providing patient care and having your hospital help people at the end of the day. And so I think that would be an excellent example of a daydream where you're just allowing things to flow into your brain. It's like an open meditation. You're seeing people walk in, and that might make you think of something else. And then that just sends that rocket ship around your brain to connect dots that you might not have thought about before. I think that's a perfect example. I'm going to use that. Can I use it, Teresa?
You can use it. Yes.
I love that. And you know, when we were growing up in school, we would get scolded for daydreaming. It's like, pay attention to class. What are you doing daydreaming again? Why, you know? So I think some of us kind of went through that growing up. So it's kind of hard to snap out of that. That actually is a good thing, is what you're saying, to daydream. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I just say daydreaming has a really bad PR team, because you're right. It's like La La Land and wool gathering and castle, all these like really unproductive sounding things. But, you know, maybe that came from an era where we didn't have robots and AI and computer to do all those tasks that we don't need to do anymore. And so now we need to reconnect back with our human skills, which are not processing data and, you know, going through lists of things to number crunch. Like we have other ways to do that now.
Okay, so now that we, I love sometimes, because Teresa and I are in the same, we're in the same industry, right? We're both in healthcare recruitment, and we always bounce ideas off each other, as well as with others. But I want to talk to someone who's not in our industry of recruitment, and that's you, and see if you can help us brainstorm through this. So we've got some hard to fill positions. You know, we've got registered nurses who are tough to get to reply, especially if they have certain types of experience that we're looking for, or maybe working on some other order. Maybe it's a tech order, or it's a physician, or whatever the case is. So we're having a hard time getting folks to come in. So we're trying to think of what are some ways we can connect with this audience in a different way. What suggestions would you have for us to go through that brainstorming process? Because I always love to hear new ways and new perspectives on how to deal with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem. It's a complex one, right? So when I went through my training for the creative problem solving method, one of the things I love about it is it's a detailed process. It's not something you can just do quickly, but there's 4 steps. And the first step is to clarify the problem. So in this case, you know, you need to hire nurses, for instance, in a creative problem solving method, which would take some time, but you might flip that and say, like, why do we need more nurses? We really need better patient care, or we need, you know, physical bodies to manage the fluid pumps, or whatever the case. And so instead of saying, how do we get more nurses? You can flip that and say, how might we provide better patient care? And then that kind of flips the switch. And I know it's total in healthcare, it's so complex. There's like regulatory and, you know, you have to have certain qualifications. But I think the first thing I would do is clarify the problem. And then in each of the steps, so the first step is clarify. Okay. The second step is ideate, which is what you're talking about, Rollis, the brainstorming. And then we go into develop and implement. So ideating on its own is not always that helpful. But if we're looking at ideation in any of the stages, the first step is to diverge. So diverging is like, well, what if we could make clones? Well, what if we could have robot nurses? What if we could have people who could work 24 hours a day without a break? Like you just diverge of no answer is wrong. And the challenge with diverging is to avoid editing your idea as you're speaking it. So Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm in a meeting with you and you're like, we need more nurses, and I'm like, why don't we just make people work 24 hours?
I've already no.
Right. So the important thing, and this goes for all of the stage, but especially the ideation, is to separate that in your mind. And that's actually the last letter in my dance, is edit later. So you need to diverge without any criticism from anybody else or any pushback, and just come up with some crazy off the wall ideas. But then you take that through the converging process, which is to filter them through a bunch of different exercises. Some of them are like voting. Some of them are like, you know, what are the most likely that we can achieve this goal. So there's a huge process, but I think that one of the keys, Rollis, is to separate your ideation, your brainstorming, from the selection of which ideas to move forward. And we often do that in our own head before we even articulate the ideas.
No, we edit our own thoughts before we say them.
Yeah.
I don't, but
Yeah.
That's true. You don't.
Yeah.
You're very good.
Can I tell you a story about that? Because it's a
Yeah.
great story I learned in my training.
But Caroline, before you tell the story,
yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand the parts of the dance. So give that to me just one more, what they stand for.
Okay, so we got to daydream, and
Okay.
we daydreamed about something else, which is fine. So there's daydream, there's A for ambiguity, which is being okay with not knowing the answer or not reacting in that moment. There's novelty, so seeking new experiences, and that's where diversity and inclusion is a massive, massive benefit to creativity, because if you get people with different worldviews working together, you get better results.
Right.
And then curiosity, which is the one we talked about with Teresa and the interviewing, and then editing later. So those are the 5 habits: daydream, ambiguity, novelty, curiosity, and edit later.
Well, you know what, Joanne, I would love if you can get that down. And if you need us to repeat any of that, let me know. But let's get that in a comment. That's a wonderful takeaway. So go with your story. Sorry. Go ahead, Caroline, please.
Oh, no, I was going to tell you a story. So we're talking about ideation. So an example was this company that it was, back before the internet, but it was a glass company. And what was happening is people that worked on the packing floor would be too busy reading the newspaper that they were using to wrap the glasses in. So it was taking too long to get the products out. So I guess smartphones aren't that new of a problem, just newspapers. So in this ideation session, they were saying, well, how do we, get this to work faster? And people were like, all these different ideas. And then finally, someone just blurted out, why don't we just poke their eyes out? Which, is an alarming suggestion. But that's the suggestion that they gave them idea to hire visually impaired workers who actually packed with less breakage, and they got government incentives and grants to hire people with disabilities, and they had a higher profit and better production. Wow. So that's an example of the diverging and then converging.
That's a clip right there for sure. That was good. I like that. That was very good. Thank you for that. Okay, so yeah, this is very interesting. Give me I want to get that down one more time. So it's divergence, right? And then there's ambiguity. And then the N was for it was new and something else.
No, okay. So there's creative thinking. There's 2 main types. There's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Okay. So brainstorming ideas and then selection of ideas. So that's kind of just how we think. But the 5 habits which I think you're asking about, Rollis, is the dance. Is that what you're asking?
The dance, yes.
Yeah. So that would be, these are just 5 easy things you can do to help all parts of your creative thinking. So daydreaming is the first one. Then facing ambiguity, novelty. So seeking new experiences, like not always getting the same coffee. I'm doing a series of dares every week, and my dare this coming week, spoiler alert, is to go to your barista and ask them to pick a drink for you to face the ambiguity.
Oh, wow. Okay. I got a crazy. Okay, I'm finished, and I got a crazy idea I want to present to you. Go ahead. You got my creative juices
flowing.
And
novelty.
Okay.
Yeah. So N for novelty. C is for curiosity. So asking questions, and then E is edit later. And editing later is what comes into this diverging separately from converging.
Yes. Okay, I'm getting it better now. Okay. Sometimes I come up with crazy ideas and I mention them to people in the space, and then they give me I challenge. Just go give me reasons why this wouldn't work. Okay, because I'm open to it. Anyway, one of my ideas is there are certain managers in certain departments that have the attrition is just through the roof. We're talking like 30, 40, 50% sometimes. And they've had this issue for years in certain departments or with certain managers. My thought is, sometimes what they'll do is instead of me making a decision, it's going to be a group think. So we're going to have a group panel for all the interviewing, and that's who's going to make the decision. We're going to make it as a group. And so attrition still stays the same. So they're just making bad decisions together instead of just one. It doesn't really help anything in some cases. So my thought is, what if it was the recruiter's job to get the requirements at the very beginning of the job, the absolute things that are needed to do the job, okay? They screen the people. Someone else maybe checks it off in HR. They make the offer and everything. And they just start working under that person. The person does, the manager doesn't even choose the person. And now this is a crazy thought. I know this is crazy. We can edit later, but basically the recruiters who like experienced recruiters have been doing this for years. They know a lot of times they know who's going to work, who isn't going to work with certain managers. They just hire them. So I want.
I've done that.
Yeah, Teresa, go ahead. Tell me about it, Teresa. How does that work?
When I first started, not the same organization I work for now, but when I first moved to Maryland, I started working for an organization where we were on a very short deadline to hire nurse externs, which would basically be somebody who's been between their junior and senior year, the summer, being a summer nurse extern. So the very first thing I did when I got there was I took a week, and it was really, I think a lot of the people that were on that I was working for and that I was working with were like, what are you doing? Because I would leave my office, which was like a central recruitment office, and I'd go to the different hospitals every day. And what I was doing was meeting with the managers, and I was doing intake sessions about what are you looking for? And it took me 3 days to get them all done. But I had then a sheet of paper, all of the department information. I talked about the manager. I talked about the personality of the department, because that's important when you're hiring. And then all of a sudden they were like, well, we need to hire 14 externs for these 2 hospitals, and we need to do it like now. And I went to the managers and said, how do you want to do this? I know we're going to get a lot of candidates. What do you want to do? They're like, Teresa, we trust you. Just pick them and do it. And I'm like, done. And I did it for the 3 years that I was there, and they were amazing externs. Amazing. And it wasn't because I'm so special. I just listened to what the managers look, and what's funny is year over year, I'd go back those 3 years. I'd say, my biggest thing was, has anything changed with the personality of your department? What's that fit look like? Have we gotten to where we're younger, fresher? Are we we're stuck in our ways? We've been here all for 30 years. What does that look like? So it can be done. I mean, I would say that it depends upon the role too, though, because I would never, I'm a nurse, but I haven't been at the clinical bedside in years. And I trust Kim Kelly, who's my director of critical care, she tees up the clinical scenarios and talks them through that. And she's very consistent. She's very good. She's very consistent with her interview questions. And I think you need to have a balance, but I like where you're going with it. I like where you're going with it.
Okay. So we have a comment that came in. Let's see, I'm trying to locate where this. So it looks like, is it Farah? Yeah, Farah came in with a comment. She says, oh, first of all, she loves the discussion. She said it reminds her of design thinking. I've never heard of that before.
Same thing. It's just kind of a different flavor of the same ice cream.
Yeah, okay. I took a design thinking course. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you, Farah, for that comment. She also says, I do not think it's that crazy of an idea. I think it's a great idea. It also decreases bias and favoritism. The recruiter would be objective, I believe. And she says, and it would save time and get people on board a lot sooner. Here's the reason why it came up to me again recently, and I love that you gave this example, Teresa. I find sometimes that because a manager may get shell-shocked after making so many not so good decisions, they feel, because it didn't work out. And so they become more tentative, and it may take them longer to make decisions. I'm not saying all leaders, I'm just saying some. It may take them longer to make decisions. And then when they take longer to make decisions, less candidates are available because they've already moved on and took other jobs. And then in some cases, they'll say, well, you know what? Let me just get other people involved so it won't just be me making the bad decision. It'll be
peer interviewing.
Peer interviewing. But I don't know that it necessarily needs a peer interview in a lot of cases. A lot of times the reason we have peer interviews is because, like what she said just now, Vera, to avoid things like bias, making sure that they're a good fit with the team. But if you don't have enough diversity, you probably don't. A peer group's not going to help you because they're just going to be just like you. So they're going to make similar decisions. So anyway, that's why I brought it up. Is I'm just wondering, in some cases, would it be better? I'm not saying all positions, but certain positions, especially one where there's lots of attrition anyway, where your risk is low. It's like it can't get any worse.
See, and it's so funny, Rollis, you know what I would have gone to is like, why do you still have that same manager there if you've got all these people leaving?
Well, I guess that's
I
another.
would be looking at the manager like, what are you doing? What's happening? Yeah.
Well, that's another good point too. Is you at some point you would have to look at the manager. But what if you made this change, Teresa, and the attrition improved? That would just mean that they might be a poor selector, but a great manager.
True.
I mean, just throwing it
True.
out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's such, you know, it always, I feel like an attorney. That depends, or an HR person. It depends. It depends. I mean, I've seen peer interviewing with new grad nurse residency programs.
Okay.
And what's great about that is like we would include a former nurse resident, an educator. And here's the interesting thing. One hospital I worked at for many years, we did not include the managers.
That's interesting.
It was the educators, the clinical nurse specialist, and then the nurses themselves and former residents or current residents. And the reason why we did that was because it created trust. It empowered the staff, and they had a vested interest to make sure the person that they were hiring was going to be great for that team. And I remember walking through the ED one day, and I remember I was talking with one of the educator, and we're walking through it. I remember one nurse was saying to another, who hired that resident? And the nurse says, I did. Like, you got a problem with that? And it was like fierce, you know, I was like, cool, they're standing up for that nurse, you know, they're going to help them be successful. So there's different sides to everything. And I think the situation just, you know, and how good is the recruiter, right? I mean, if you have a recruiter who's not using their curiosity and they're not trying to connect, if they're just trying to check a box, are they going to be the best person? They're going to be like, well, on their resume, it says
that's true
they
too.
meet this criteria.
And are they having conversations, or are they just reading a resume? Right. Caroline, we've talked a lot. You've heard us both on both sides. What are some ways you would suggest we work through this issue, or what other thoughts do you have on this?
Well, I think you already both have it, like as far as creativity goes, you know, between Teresa's comment about curiosity. And I think also this idea of, you've talked about like not knowing the hiring manager has to check a box, that's facing ambiguity. So that's one of the creative, you know, habits. And I think, Rollis, with your idea of like, this is a crazy idea, why don't we just do it? And it might not be that is the idea, but it might be something like Teresa saying, well, maybe it depends. So like maybe we can do some type of hybrid approach, or maybe we can try something differently. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about taking, for me, when I engage my creativity, I look at, okay, what's the risk? And I have Ken Jeong's voice in my head from The Hangover, where they left him in the desert. Remember that? And they thought he was dead. And then they came back later and they were like, we've had a rough day. And he's like, but did you die? So I have his voice in my head, right? And maybe you won't die, but maybe if you go to that radical decision, you could end up having like an unsustainable number of positions open. So maybe you're like, well, that's really too big of a risk. So I think engaging creativity within recruitment starts with risk assessment. And then from there, just taking tiny risks, like maybe it's in one position or with this particular manager that's more open to it, and working and iterating. Yeah. And not being afraid to fail a little bit, as long as, you know, people don't die.
Exactly. I mean, my thought would be, it would be on first of all, would be on a more of an entry level type position that already has high turnover, already experiencing high turnover. So if we make this decision and we do it, my risk is low because the turnover is already bad, and it's for entry level positions anyway. So why do we make the manager go through the decision making process of hiring all these people? Well, we could just have them show up on a certain day and they just start working based on did they meet the qualifications? Because I've heard some pretty strange reasons as to why hiring managers don't want to move forward with certain candidates, because when you have so many candidates and you're trying to filter through, you're just trying to find any reason you can to filter them out. And I don't want to go into all the different things I've heard, but some of them are rather peculiar as to why you wouldn't want to hire this person or consider them consider to hire them.
People, I've gotten into arguments with hiring managers over their decision to move forward or not. And I am like, please tell me the why. And is this defensible in a court of law? Because they really could come back and bite us with this one, because there's no reason why you wouldn't hire them. And you're picking this other person who has nowhere near the skill set. And then that's where you get into like, well, do they look like you?
Yeah.
Or do they look like somebody else? Or what's their last name or first name, or what's their religion, or whatever, fill in the blank. You could run into all kinds of issues. But I think that you're just giving me some ideas. See, the curiosity is like, oh, like, you know, our environmental services staff. Like, I think in order for somebody other than the hiring manager to make the decision, you need to understand how they interview, what they're asking, and then sit in. If you're the recruiter, sit in on the interviews.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I always tell people, like my team, I'm like, go sit in on the interviews. If you have a concern. And my one recruiter, she came back, she goes, oh my gosh. I said, what did you find out? She says, well, the person came in immediately, like one of the hiring managers, like, hi, honey, how you doing? And I was like, like, you know, that's not the way you do that. And this wasn't at the organization I work at now, but I just thought it was so interesting. It was like, and did, you know, or sitting in with, I love doctors when they interview. So how many kids do you have? And, you know, are you going to be able to work the night shift? And what about your children? And it's like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So let's go back to basics. But even just understanding their style, how they connect with candidates, what questions are important to them.
Yeah.
Like I can tell you in some housekeeping roles, depends upon the hospital, they just want to know, can you show up every other weekend? And can you work this shift? And you got a pulse, let's go. And there are other people that are really more particular because they realize the environmental services, housekeeping folks, they're interacting with patients. We should look beyond just, can you clean the floor? Because you're not doing it at night in a vacuum by yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I wanted to mention something that Farah had brought up about about bias. And
yes, please.
A couple of times.
Thank you for
And I think that. Yeah, I think sitting in that comfort of, like, we don't know we have a bias if it's unconscious, because that's the entire definition.
Exactly.
So, I mean, what you are both saying is, you know, hiring managers make these decisions and they can't even say why. And one of my favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman. And in that book, he talks about, we all think we're using this, but we're actually using this. And then we use our thinking brain to justify the decision.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think you have something really important in there as far as removing that unconscious bias. And I don't think it's deliberate, I hope in most cases, but we make shortcuts and heuristics about the world because that's how we survive. So if someone's hired a bunch of people and like every blonde person or whatever, or every person who had, you know, whatever high school on their resume was a disaster, they can't really help unconsciously having a bias against that. So we have to either make a lot of effort to think very carefully about our decisions, which is very hard, or remove that or minimize that as much as possible, which is what you're talking about. Teresa, I want to know
oh my God. So when I first started as a recruiter, 2005, nurse recruitment, mind you, I was not meeting the candidates then necessarily. Sometimes they'd come into the office back in the day for the interview with me first. But my boss came to me and she said, you are not hiring nurses that have a weight problem. And I said, what? She said, I noticed that you're not hiring any obese nurses. And I said, but I'm not even meeting these nurses. I am just talking with them on the phone. She goes, what are you talking to them about? And what I found out, what I was doing was I was connecting with them and talking about, I was doing Spartan races at the time, right? So I was running and I was doing CrossFit. And when they might list their hobbies, I was totally connecting. So I was mirroring them without even seeing them.
Oh, wow. That's wow.
And I had to sort of be like, okay, wow, I need to be careful with that, right? Because, and then they'd all show up to new employee orientation and they were all these, you know, young, fit people. It would look different now, by the way. But it was like, it made me have that. She was able to point out to me, she goes, you know, nurses could be of all shapes and sizes. I said, of course they can. And you know, it made me change the way I had my conversations and the way I would present the candidates. And I focused more on their their ability to have a great patient experience with the patients, and their skill set to do the job, and their value set, not necessarily what their hobbies were.
That, well, you know what? First of all, I applaud your honesty for that, because you didn't sugarcoat your role in it. And second of all, that's a great example. So I'm looking at the audience here, and they love it too. So thank you for sharing that. Farah actually has another couple of comments she made I thought were really good. She says, also, why are the nurses leaving? We can fill in the blank. Why are whoever it is leaving? And are they doing exit interviews, looking at nurse staff satisfaction and the ND-NQI data?
ND-NQI data.
Yeah. And she says, yes, it's...
Yeah, we have great, I could tell you, for the nurses that are staying at our hospital, our ND-NQI data is amazing. It's fantastic. And, you know, I actually take care of all the exit interviews at our hospital. And the sad part to me is they still love us. They're just leaving. And why are they leaving? Rollis, you probably know what I'm going to say. It's because they can go get a travel contract somewhere and make 5 times the amount of money. And we don't know that they're being greedy. They might have a significant other who just lost their job because they were in the hospitality industry, or laid off because their business closed. So we're in this weird time right now that I don't think, I mean, you could love your organization. And it's funny, most of our nurses, when they go take a travel contract, they want to stay PRN or, you know, minimal time with us so they can come back.
Yeah.
And we let them because we love them and we get it. And sometimes it's really frustrating because then we have to turn around and hire a traveler. It's a vicious cycle right now that we're in. But I think that it's a matter of, I would bank on Leanne Sedone as our chief nursing officer as one of the most engaging, amazing nursing leaders that you could have in an organization. And yes, it's a shameless plug, but Leanne is amazing. And it's beyond us. Like it's sort of spirals out of our control. We're in the middle of this pandemic. So, but what can you do to keep people that are going to stay anyway and keep them happy is have that level of engagement. Let them, they need to know that you care, not just about the patient experience scores, but that you care about them, right? That's more important than
stats
ever.
around, and it's not an isolated thing, because I think creativity and psychological safety, which is kind of what you're talking about, Teresa, is intertwined. But there are some recent statistics that show that people who feel creative at work are half as likely to be looking for another job. That's huge. Yet only 18% of people who are surveyed, and this isn't healthcare specific, but only 18% of people surveyed feel like they can express their creativity at work. So like I call that the low hanging fruit that's going to rot on the vine, like 18% of people. But then if you are creative at work, you're 50% less likely to be looking for another job. So I think that there are things you can do to try to help that employee experience. And I'm not going to suggest it's as simple as, doing improv meetings or something, but I think having that psychological safety and that creativity in a safe place. And then that, the idea when you mentioned we have to turn around and hire traveling nurses, I'm like, that's a huge opportunity for some creative problem solving. Like, how might we keep our nurses, or how might we balance our budget so that we can keep the nurses we already have, but give them what they need? I don't know. I mean, that's a huge opportunity there, because you're right. That seems like crazy. You let people go and then you're hiring basically the same people to come back because they're contract workers. So it's an interesting, and I don't know the business or the industry very well, like from your perspective, but it just seems from an outsider point of view, like that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. It's a snowball effect over the last 2 years. We're in a really, truly unique time right now. I think, even candidate flow from an inbound candidate flow, where I'm part of Johns Hopkins, which everybody knows Johns Hopkins, but I'm in one of the smaller community hospitals, and how do I get that name known, right? So it's like, how do you differentiate yourself? And by, to me, like using videos and using things that are unique. We had a show with Rollis where we were talking about the journey to magnet status, and Leanne and Karen Nevis were talking about, we had this theme, there's no place like home in the Wizard of Oz. They literally put on a tutu Okay. And
Yeah,
they were dressed up
yeah.
like Glenda the Good Witch and like Dorothy. And they went down to the American Nurses Association, which is actually right around the corner from where I live. And that's where they dropped off the magnet documents. And they're like, the idea that they're not afraid to have fun, they're not afraid to express joy or sorrow. We just lost a physician to COVID, one of our hospitalists. And it's like, you have to take a moment to stop. I just talked to a nurse who was doing a shadow with us because she was undecided whether or not she wanted the job. And she said that it was an ED, and a motor vehicle accident patient came in, and the patient didn't make it. And instead of going on to the next patient, which is the expectation, the doctor said, I just want to stop for a second. This is hard, people.
Yeah.
This is hard. But I know we have to go admit this next patient, but let's just take a moment of silence. And if it's not a prayer, it's whatever you want it to be. Let's just take a moment of silence. And it's like, that's not prescribed. He didn't have to do that. But I think of creativity as like, to him, that was how he coped with that to move forward. And that's probably going to be the decision maker as to why this nurse will come work for us.
Yeah.
Not the amazing team, not the pay, just that one moment in time.
It's the humanity, right? It's
the
humanity of being like, we're humans, we're not robots, and creativity is a part of that. But I think it's just about the idea of showing yourself, your true self, because nobody's going to go through that experience, and very few people, I think, and then just move on genuinely. Like doing that because they think that's what they should do, but that's not really what anybody wants anymore. Like,
well, the idea of resiliency centers, and I mean, more as the body counts are ticking up again, the people are getting sicker again, and it's like you have to be able to somehow cope with that. I mean, I was a hospice nurse. I get it. I'd pronounce a patient, drive down the road, and admit another patient, and you got to have an outlet for that.
Yeah.
Besides wine.
I tell you, this is touching. I was actually I interviewed several nurses yesterday, myself and my staff, for some videos here in Houston, and one of them said that to go through this, where this wave is where the patients they're sick, very, very sick, but they're also young. They're younger than the last wave, and so to go outside of the facility and see how people are just kind of nonchalant about all this after she just got off a 12, 13, 14-hour shift and got 3 or 4 people die in a shift or something like that. It can be very taxing on a person, and so you have to have a way of processing that. And so I wish we had more time. We already hit the hour, and there's already a ton of comments we have to look at later. Please, ladies, because there's some great interactions going on here. One's talking about how we need to evaluate and be more performance-based of the employees, and then which is Glenn. And Farrah comes back and says we'll also need to do performance on the leaders too, kind of back and forth, kind of a 360. I don't know. Anyway, some good stuff in there. Thank you for all your comments you're making. I am going to read all of them later. Just kind of glance at them just now. But thank you for coming back, Glenn, and posting your comment. Farrah, appreciate all your comments. Charles says he's going to watch it later. Thank you, Charles, for watching. But anything you want to leave our group with as a closing statement? First, did you want to go, Teresa, and then Caroline, you want to end it with us?
I'm just excited about this because I'm going to be talking to Caroline about maybe talking to our RACR group.
Awesome.
I mean, to me, it's a validation of going with your heart on so many things. I think that when you're pure in your thought process about what you want to do and the why you want to do it, that your authentic self, to me, always is always what shines through. And that's that connection. That could be a difference maker. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you for all you do, Teresa. You're amazing. Caroline. Just for folks who don't know, Dr. Brookfield, because she is a veterinarian. Okay. So go ahead.
Thank you. Teresa, what you made me think of is when I was in high school and I developed a love for performance and improv and acting, which is kind of where I'm at as a speaker now. I felt like I had to choose art or science. And so I decided to become a veterinarian, which is a great career and for many reasons has been fantastic. But I've realized you don't have to choose. And it's the same in healthcare, you don't have to choose credibility and competency versus like humanity and showing some humor and personality. I think you can have both. And a plug for creativity, and I'm talking about everyday creativity, making a meal, choosing your outfit. There's so much data and research for those who think they're not creative or that it's like for grandmas and kindergartners. You know, there's even a study in nurses I could share, Teresa, as well, and Rollis, about how everyday creativity increases their resilience to bounce back from difficult things, and how everyday creativity makes you happier. It increases your positive effect the next day. And when you're happier, you do more creativity. So creativity, resilience, well-being is so intimately connected. And I think that it's a really, like I said, the low-hanging fruit for an opportunity for people to increase their joy at work, increase their retention, and just have it so that people are smiling more, because it's tough right now.
Wow, I love that. And, you know, I have to mention this. Farah said she was an emergency nurse, and she said debriefing is so important. Getting the support you need is extremely important, and having ways to coach. She says, thank you, everyone. This is great. So she really appreciated both your points. So thank you for being on our panel today, both Teresa and Caroline. You guys were amazing today. I love the conversation. It's got my creative juices flowing, guys. It does. And so, yeah, we need to
Creativity is contagious.
It is. So the folks in the comments, let us know what resonated with you the most from today. Please, and we're going to read all your comments. So even if we don't get a chance to read them now, we're going to read them later. So we'll thank you for doing that. And let's say bye to everyone. Stay on. Bye, everyone. Okay, then Joanna, let me know when it's okay to end the stream. This was fun. Today's conversation was actually fun for me, especially as it progressed. You know, creativity is one of those things I think you have to kind of get it. It's like an engine. You got to kind of rev it up a little bit.
We improv this.
Yeah, we totally did. We didn't have anything planned. All we had was the title plan. That was it.
It's perfect.
Which I love it.
It's true though. It's contagious the more you do it. And that's why, you know, so many things are about like, you know, do these 10 steps, but it's really just about embedding small habits in your day and approaching things with a curious mind. And